what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, August 28th, 2018 here, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And a quick little reminder, tomorrow, August 29th, is my birthday. Also happens to be Michael Jackson's birthday and that of the late Senator John McCain, which I guess blows that whole astrology thing out of the water because we're nothing at all alike. But as you know, Claire and I put a huge amount of work into the website and the radio show, and we're long overdue for a rest. So we're taking the rest of the week off. We will be back here broadcasting live on Labor Day, Monday, here at RBN. But we just needed to step away, not so much from the workload as just having a few days away, not thinking about the politics, which does get a little overwhelming at times. All right, so let's get into things right now and start with our latest news. We're still seeing the aftermath of John McCain's passing, and everybody's lionizing him. In the corporate media and over at the independent media, they're basically telling the truth on him. But there was an interesting observation that came out of Zero Hedge, reminding us all that, Obama and his supporters hated and mocked John McCain, back in 2008, when McCain challenged Obama for the presidency. There was a lot of hostility going there. Sorry, I seem to have picked up a case of the hiccups. Just give me a second. All right, we're back here. Now, Rush Limbaugh is out there saying that the reason they're praising John McCain so much has less to do with them liking him or him doing something that's all that praiseworthy, as well as pushing a political agenda. And what that agenda is a little unclear at this point. But they want John McCain, I think, to be historically untouchable, because there are a lot of things in his background that were not very good. In fact, John McCain, based his political prominence on his image as a heroic Vietnam prisoner of war. But yet, during his time in the Congress, he worked very hard to hide from the public information about American prisoners in Vietnam who didn't return home. They were still kept there. And throughout his career, McCain has quietly sponsored and pushed into federal law prohibitions that keep the most revealing information about these men buried as classified documents. Now, for those of you who are Sylvester Stallone fans, the second Rambo movie, where he's supposed to go in and rescue some of the POWs and bring them out, and then he's betrayed by his own people. And there's a line at the very end, which is actually telling you what happened. At the end of the Vietnam War, the U.S. government agreed to pay Vietnam reparations in exchange for the return of the remaining POWs. Well, the U.S. government never wrote the check. And that's why Vietnam hung on to the POWs. The money was worth more to the government than the kids who'd been left behind. And apparently McCain was part of that here. Now, yesterday we were talking about how the Arizona governor is looking at a very short list of who's going to replace John McCain, and that Cindy McCain, his widow, was on that short list. And there's actually been kind of a tradition throughout U.S. history that when a member of Congress dies, their wife is appointed to replace them, even though in this case, Cindy McCain has never held elected office. But as of today, it looks like Cindy McCain has fallen off the list, and Governor Ducey is basically leaning towards picking someone that Trump will be pleased with. So the Arizona governor wants to curry some little favor here, and that may mean we get somebody a little more conducive to making America great. All right, let's talk about the war zones. There is a lot going on, and I'm concerned about what may happen over this weekend when Americans are distracted by sporting events and hot dogs and days at the beach and so forth. The Russian military continues to insist that they are seeing the U.S. military putting together a strike force for a major attack on Syrian government forces to be justified by a staged chemical attack in the province of Idlib. And they've already noted the deployment of the USS the Sullivans to the Persian Gulf and the rebasing of a B-1B Lancer strategic bomber to an airbase in Qatar. The missile destroyer USS Ross, carrying 28 Tomahawk cruise missiles, entered the Mediterranean. So right now the U.S. is positioned to launch at least 84 Tomahawk cruise missiles and 24 AGM-158 joint air-to-surface standoff missiles if it decided to strike the war-torn country now. Left unsaid, though, is that SSGN that was reportedly in the area. And that carries 192 missiles in those converted launch tubes here. So reports are appearing that the Syrian Air Defense Forces are already preparing to repel an expected U.S.-led missile strike by deploying additional specialists and air defense systems near crucial objects of the infrastructure. And I would say you might want to think about beefing up defenses around Damascus itself, because they may just go ahead and go for Assad and get it over and done with. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So all of a sudden, everybody who's on the west side of this whole thing, they're always they're talking up chemical weapons again. You know, oh, chemical weapons against its people. And John Bolton's out there saying there'll be a massive U.S. response if Assad dares use a gas attack on his civilians ever again. I dare you to do it, Assad. I just dare you to do it out there. All right, moment of calm here. Forget the lies about Saddam's nuclear weapons. Forget that the United States has already tried to frame Assad for gassing his own people in 2013 and 2014 and how those hoaxes were exposed. Forget that Assad has already surrendered all of his chemical weapons, confirmed by both the UN and the Pentagon. Forget about the fact that all the chemical weapons that have been found in Syria recently tracked back to the United States, Great Britain, and other Western nations and Israel. Just ask yourself these questions. Why would Assad, on the verge of winning the war, use chemical weapons knowing it would open the door to the invasion Washington, D.C. wants? And if Assad were dumb enough to use chemical weapons, why use them on civilians instead of on the enemy? Bolton's story makes no sense at all, but then propaganda seldom does. They just expect you to believe what you're told to believe. I think those days are pretty much over. France is stepping on into it. French President Macron is saying that France is ready to conduct new strikes on Syria if chemical weapons are used. That's the red line. If chemical weapons are used, we dare you to use a chemical weapon and see what happened here. Now, there was something very weird that happened in France in a town called Saumur. Gardeners employed by the town made a discovery. They went to work restoring on an old church, and behind that church are old natural caves. And when they arrived there to do the work, they saw three men hopping into a white van and leaving the place. So they went to investigate the cave. They found ISIS flags, audio and video equipment, newspapers in Arabic, and a generator. So they immediately alerted the local police, who in turn alerted all the other services of the state, national police, anti-terror police, prosecuted the Republic Scientific Police. But the official story is, oh, this was just an exercise led by the Military Center for Nuclear, Chemical, Biological, and Radiological Defense. But no one was told of that exercise. Not the local police, not the anti-terrorist forces. Only one general in the army knew what was going on. And why, if this is just an exercise, would they need ISIS flags and stuff in Arabic? Now remember, every time there's a false flag attack, there's always some convenient car nearby full of ISIS flags and Arabic material. So it looks like somebody was planting a false flag in France. And that may dovetail with Macron getting all butch and saying, yes, we will strike, we will do this. Now, interestingly enough, there's a story that just surfaced. And this is from Fort Russ. Apparently, there was a secret meeting between U.S. and Syrian diplomats, and the U.S. made an offer to withdraw from Syria in exchange for three demands. First, Iran's full withdrawal from the Syrian south, and second, obtaining written assurance that U.S. companies will receive a chunk of the oil sector in eastern Syria. which is a big part of what this war was about. You know, give us the oil, you can keep your country, we don't care here. And third, to provide the Syrian side with the Americans with full data on the terrorist groups and their members, including the numbers of foreign victims of those groups and those who survived. Now, the Syrian side came on back and said, the offer is tempting, but judging by this all of a sudden ramp up of fear-mongering about chemical weapons and Macron saying we will strike and Bolton seeing strike, we don't know. Maybe the U.S. and Syria came to the agreement and Bolton's trying to scuttle the deal. Because remember, our government is not seeing Syria with one eye. Everybody's got a different point of view, and Bolton, like John McCain, never met a war he didn't love. So they may be going ahead to try and make sure there is no agreement made. So, meanwhile, down in Afrin, remember back when Turkey crossed over the border and they took up military positions around Afrin and they reassured Assad, this is just temporary, we're here to fight ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Well, temporary has now turned into permanent, and apparently the civilians living in that area are a little upset about it. And basically they're paving the ground to annex the region. They're already giving Turkish names to the landmarks. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Keith Rogers, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I had one question for you. Have you seen the photos of Damascus and those other surrounding areas where there's millions of Syrians in the streets celebrating their victories and stuff?
Yes.
Could you imagine if the U.S. or anyone else did as we would call it, a decapitation strike on Syria and, say, took out Assad? What would the U.S. do as far as PR work to regain the anger that those Syrians would face?
That would be a tough one. I think if the U.S. actually did a decapitation strike on Assad, the political consequences are going to be serious. Because, first of all, it is going to completely, undermine the fact that the U.S. was supposedly only there for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But then the U.S. has changed their reason for being in Syria so many times, it's not like anybody's paying attention anymore. But I think the Syrian people would be very angry, and Damascus, of course, is their capital city, but I think a new leader would probably arise who would not be amenable to U.S. interests. The U.S. is going to try and force a new government into Damascus, but I think the Syrian people are going to force back.
Yeah, well, that was my same premise here, because this would be just like the constant rhetoric we see towards Vladimir Putin like that. What would happen if there was some kind of a strike on Moscow there? Do you think that the Russians would actually sit back and just go their wayward direction and not care? No, they would rise up.
Yep. Well, I mean, look at what happened over in Yemen when a few years ago the U.S. Overthrew their legitimate government and tried to put in this internationally approved puppet regime. And the people of Yemen are fighting back, and they're still fighting back, and they're showing tremendous courage doing so.
Right. I just think there's really some bad vibes I'm getting from this because of what the State Department is saying and stuff. It does not make sense to, like you mentioned there, with Assad winning and everything like that against all these Western-backed. I mean, when they start calling it a civil war and then they start showing all the players there, they're from, 80 or 50 or some odd different countries. It's not a civil war.
Nope. It's a mercenary war. 95% of the Free Syria army were even Syrians. They're just there for the money.
Right. All right, well, I just thought I'd throw that with you because that's been bugging me here because I was just thinking, with the quotes from the Syrians where they says that Assad isn't Syria, Syria is Assad. They stand behind their president, unlike a lot of Americans here with our corrupt governments and stuff that we have, that they actually stand behind their, and of course, remember the PR work that has been to villainize him about Assad doing this. Briefly, there's this nice Jewish kid right behind her. He's a former IDF soldier there, and I got talking to him, and I threw this at him. I said, his name's Easy, and I said, Easy, I says, you realize that Hitler didn't kill anyone? And he raised his eyebrow at me, and I went on to say that Stalin, Lenin, Mao, Bush's, Clinton's, Bush Jr., Obama, Trump, they haven't killed anyone. I says, those people who allegedly died by the millions and have been verified dead were killed by those just doing their jobs. And Easy mumbled something in Hebrew there, and I looked at his girlfriend there, and I asked her, what did he say? And she said grunts. So he knows.
Yes.
And this is what it is. The governments play each other against us. And I learned that back in ham radio back in the 70s there when I was talking to the Soviet Union. These people want to go, like you would say, it doesn't matter whether you're straight, bi, gay, or bended or pretzel, Everyone just wants to live. It's these governments that got to keep us fighting.
Yep.
And I just want to share
remember something about
happy birthday.
Well, thank you very much here. But I mean, if you think about it, there's this little country, Syria, and yes, they had help from the Russians later on, but they basically have held off the military might of the United States. And it's changing the balance of power in the region because the U.S. military is no longer seen as invincible. They're seen as dangerous.
Yeah, certainly. And remember, do you remember when that UK plane went down and they found out they had those, I don't know if they're MI6 or what, the Syrians had captured those British agents?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a continued play, whether it's France doing it, UK and stuff, and I know what it's all for, or we all know what it's all for. It's for that greater Israel, it's the partitioning of Syria. And the same ones the U.S. is backing today, the Kurds, is the same ones that the U.S. supplied gas to, in which Saddam gassed those Kurds. So.
Okay, well.
Anyway.
Yeah. It is a mess out there. I mean, we've been following it now for 24 years here. I mean, with this birthday, it's officially, I've spent a third of my life doing this, the website, and I've been doing the radio show now for, I guess, 11 years here and there. Anyway, Keith, thanks an awful lot for the phone call, and we're going to let you go.
All right, thank you. Bye.
All right, bye-bye. Now, speaking of Yemen, airstrikes are pounding Houthi targets near the Sana'a airport and the capital, and on an airbase near Yemen's capital. This is all coming out through social media. More than 10 strikes were conducted against the Al-Dailima airbase in Sana'a. Houthi sources have indicated the attack is in response to their drone attack on the Dubai airport, an incident which the United Arab Emirates denied on Monday ever actually happened. Now, per Reuters, Al Misra TV reported the Saudi-led coalition had struck the Yemeni airport and airbase multiple times. And, of course, we are seeing this story being reported in Press TV, where Yemeni forces did launch a drone strike against Dubai International Airport, which is considered less a military target and more of a strategic economic target. And a Yemeni military source speaking on a condition of anonymity said Yemeni soldiers and their allies attacked the airport using a domestically built long-endurance Samad-3 unmanned aerial vehicle on Monday evening. And in the original source article, they even have a photo of this thing. It's a simple but elegant design, and simple but elegant is always going to be working here. Meanwhile, over in Saudi Arabia, apparently Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's advisors are suggesting he shift the war from Yemen to Lebanon, that now is an ideal time to basically go after Lebanon. So here a war, there a war, everywhere a war. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Iran, as you know, has declared that it is in control of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, and they're saying there's no need for the naval presence of alien countries who don't actually live there. And he's saying Iran can ensure the security of the Persian Gulf, and everybody else can go home. And Iran is pledging that friendly and neutral ships will have unfettered access to these vital waterways into the oil-rich regions here. And having outsiders operating nuclear-powered ships, warships in the Gulf creates potential environmental problems, not just for Iran, but its Arab neighbors. Now, whether this is going to work or not is really dependent on all the other nations that border these two Gulfs, because they may lean on the side of Iran for a very simple reason. They have been watching the U.S. government throwing sanctions left and right, and realize they could be hit any time the idea pops into Donald Trump or Netanyahu's head. So they may choose to unite for the protection of their own coastal areas here. Now, France has now postponed all non-essential travel by diplomats and officials to Iran. So things are heating up. And it may be connected with this other story where Iran has arrested tens of spies working in government agencies. And apparently it's a roll-up. And so they're basically catching all these assets. So it's not going to help calm things down here a little bit. And of course, from the U.S. point of view, they want to go into Iran. They've made that very, very obvious. But they've got to make it look like it's Iran's fault, that Iran struck first. Now, the other day we were telling you on how Iran had gone to the International Court of Justice in The Hague, which is the highest court on earth. It's a court of nations. It's part of the United Nations. And they had asked the court to lift these sanctions by the U.S., saying that it violates a 1955 treaty. And again, nobody's surprised when the United States violates a treaty. But Trump breached the treaty when he reimposed the sanctions after unilaterally withdrawing from a multilateral nuclear deal. Now, U.S. State Department lawyer Jennifer Newstead is telling the International Court of Justice that it lacks prima facie jurisdiction to hear Iran's claim. In other words, the U.S. is saying the International Court of Justice and the United Nations have no jurisdiction. And she went on to say the U.S. has the right to protect its national security and other interests. Now, there's a cute little phrase. National security, yeah. Every nation has a right to protect its national security. It's what's hidden inside that other phrase, the other interests, that should be made a little more transparent before we decide whether or not the U.S. has a right. For example, if the U.S. wants to capture Iran's oil, do they have a right to do so? No, not really. They can do it, but they don't have a right to do it. Now, over in Libya, in a harsh reminder that nature abhors a vacuum, apparently Libya is erupting into violence as rival factions battle each other on the streets of Tripoli, basically trying to fill that void left when Muammar Gaddafi was taken out. And it's another good example. When Gaddafi was there, Libya was beautiful, a very high literacy rate, the gold dinar, massive waterworks, the greening up of the country. And then we take down the leader and let the country descend into anarchy. And it's another nation destroyed. I would sure love to live in a world where we don't have to learn our geography on the basis of who bombed who last night. That's what I would like. Now, here's an article came out of Zero Hedge. And basically it's talking about when Fox News host Tucker Carlson asked Donald Trump last month why he should send his son to die defending Montenegro, who's NATO's newest member. And the president came on back and said that, well, we shouldn't be willing to sacrifice their lives for such a trivial ally. But there's a problem. NATO is this organization, this treaty, and unfortunately, in their haste to gobble up a lot of the Balkans, NATO now has as members countries that are very unstable and could trigger a war themselves and drag all of NATO into it, and the rest of the world with it as well. So Montenegro, they're aggressive. Macedonia could get us into a war. It's amazing how all of these movers and shakers, the people who are running the world, don't really think long term. It's always this immediate objective. We want more nations in NATO. We want to encroach on Russia. And then all of a sudden you find that those new nations may be a liability. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And apparently, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has come on out openly saying that if Yemen does not surrender, they're going to intentionally target women and children. Needless to say, this provoked an international outcry. But apparently bin Salman thinks this is the best way to get those people of Yemen to quit complaining about having their own government and accept the government that the United States wants them to have. Meanwhile, as we mentioned before, Russia is sending their largest naval fleet ever to Syrian waters. And it's now up to, looks like 16 ships, plus the attendant auxiliaries and so forth and so on. Those are some big ships. Now, speaking of big ships, we reported the other day, the United States is reactivating the Second Fleet. And the Second Fleet was basically during World War II and the Cold War, was to guard the Atlantic sea lanes of communication, to make sure that those shipping lanes stayed open for the passage of cargo and in wartime weapons, and they're reactivating it. Now, it's probably going to cost a lot of money. The hulls of those ships may still be in storage somewhere. I know we have mothballed ships down here in Pearl Harbor over in the West Lock. A lot of mothballed ships in most of the naval ports, but they're still going to have to be brought back online. The justification for spending all this money and reactivating the Second Fleet is because of Russia is growing strong in the Arctic. Ooh, those Russians, they're going after Santa Claus. We've got to protect him here, so we need more weapons and more ships. And so they're screaming about the Pentagon's lagging military capacity in the Atlantic and the Arctic. Well, what's really going on here, of course, is there's going to be a new battleground in the Arctic because there are vast deposits of oil and gas down there. It's very deep. It's down on the abyssal plains. There's going to have to be some new technologies built to extract it. Stuff that makes the Deepwater Horizon look like a soda straw. Oh, right, those are banned now. U.S. officials are saying they aren't looking for a fight, but merely building a deterrent to ward off resurgent foreign powers and Russian aggression. And apparently, at the time the USSR collapsed, the Second Fleet numbered over 100 vessels. So again, more Cold War marine rivalry. And we can see who the aggressor is in all of this. All right, the United States Army came on out accusing Russia today of ridiculous misinformation for reporting a Russian government suggestion that Islamic State is operating inside a U.S.-controlled zone in Syria. How dare you? That it's ridiculous. It's nonsense. Unfortunately for this Army colonel, the United Nations and NBC also reported the same story. Well, if it's on NBC, it's true, but if Russia Today is reporting it, it has to be a lie. Down in South Africa, things are getting very, very dicey. We could see an actual civil war, certainly a lot of interracial conflict. And interestingly enough, the African National Congress has temporarily withdrawn that confiscation plan because as of right now it is unconstitutional. So they're having to withdraw it. Then they're going to change the Constitution to make it legal. And here's what's really weird. British Prime Minister Theresa May said that Britain will back South Africa's land reform program if it is implemented in accordance with the law, despite the fact that a lot of those white farmers who are going to lose those farms are descendants of British settlers. So she's turning her back on her own people. Now, South Africa is saying that the Zulu lands are exempt. So, but it's going to lead to violence. And even if they succeed in pulling this off, look what happened to Zimbabwe. They wrecked the place. They just wrecked the place. Okay, now Mattis is out there saying that the United States is not planning to suspend any more drills with South Korea unless ordered to by Trump. Now, several drills were suspended as an act of goodwill toward Pyongyang, but there are no more plans by Mattis to cancel any more. That leaves open a wild card. What if South Africa says, we don't want to have the drills anymore? That could happen. That could happen. I think Moon Jae-in is still thinking he wants to reunify the Koreas and he wants the U.S. military out of the peninsula. Meanwhile, up in North Korea, they're accusing the United States of hatching a criminal plot to unleash a war. Well, yeah, that's what they do over there in Washington, D.C. Okay. Now, do you remember a project called Canary Mission? Now, Canary Mission was an operation. It was an anonymous website that aims to tarnish the reputations of any U.S. supporters of Palestinian rights. If you come on out and you say Palestine has a legitimate right of return, or the Palestinians shouldn't be starved, or the Palestinians shouldn't have their land stolen, then your name gets put on this website and they dig up all the dirt that they can on you to try and smear you and wreck your career. Now, in Al Jazeera's censored investigative film, The Lobby USA, remember, it's not going to be shown, but bits of it are leaking out. And the Electronic Intifada is releasing segments it has obtained, and one of them names Adam Milstein as the Canary Mission funder. So he is the guy who's out there with this well-funded smear campaign. All right, let's get to the domestic politics because this is an important story. This came out of Sputnik News. Pardon me. A Ukrainian political consultant has revealed that former MI6 agent Christopher Steele sought and paid for researchers in Ukraine to concoct fake stories about Donald Trump prior to his election as U.S. president to use in the now infamous dossier. In other words, according to this Ukrainian, the stuff in the dossier was just made up. Now, this former diplomat, Andrei Telezenko, is connected to a Democratic National Committee operative named Alexandra Chalupa, who also worked for clients in Ukrainian politics. So they're basically saying, this was all a hoax from the beginning. The stuff about the prostitutes and all the rest, they just made it up. They just made it up. So, now, Representative Mark Meadows has revealed yesterday morning, congressional investigators have learned new information suggesting that the FBI and the Department of Justice leaked information to the press about what was going on in their investigations. Then, when these anonymous leaks were published as press stories, then Mueller used those press stories as, quote, confirmation, a second source, to get the FISA court to issue the warrants on Trump advisor Carter Page. Now, Bruce Orr is being grilled right now in a closed-door session. And, of course, we had a hint that at least one of the stories being held up as corroboration for the Russian dossier was sourced back to Steele himself. So they were just fabricating this stuff. Just one fabrication after the other, after the other, after the other. They're all liars over there in Washington, D.C. If they ever caught themselves telling the truth, they'd have to tell a lie real quick just to stay in practice. I think some of those people lie so much, if they ever told the truth by accident, they would explode. Now, CNN has been caught in yet another fake news scandal, and this has to do with Michael Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, who admitted that he was the anonymous source for this CNN report that claimed Cohen was willing to tell Special Counsel Mueller that President Donald Trump knew in advance about the Trump Tower meeting in which Russians were expected to offer his campaign dirt on Hillary Clinton. Now, Cohen's lawyer told CNN's Anderson Cooper last week that Cohen does not have any information that Trump knew about the meeting in advance, saying, "I think the reporting of the story got mixed up in the course of a criminal investigation. We were not the source of the story." However, Davis had told BuzzFeed News he was the source for CNN's July 26th report, which directly contradicts what he told Cooper. So he's been caught in a lie again. Now, Davis insists it wasn't a lie. He's saying he unintentionally misspoke, and he made a mistake. How dare you say I lied? I'm a lawyer after all. By the way, somebody pointed out something very interesting. This FBI raid of Michael Cohen's office was supposedly over this hush money payment made to Stormy Daniels and this Playmate centerfold. But over at Investment Watch blog, they're pointing out when Bill Clinton's lawyer paid $850,000 to silence Paula Jones, the FBI never raided his office. Kind of interesting. And I want to repeat this story from yesterday because it shows you just how fraudulent all of this is. Former FBI Director James Comey lied about searching Clinton's emails on Anthony Weiner's laptop. And in fact, they only searched less than 0.5% of the electronic mail was searched for classified information. This whole thing's just entirely crooked here. Now, there's a new wrinkle on Hillary's private email server. Apparently, and this is according to Daily Caller, a Chinese-owned company operating in the Washington, D.C. area was one of the 10 outsiders that broke into Hillary Clinton's private server throughout her term as Secretary of State. And according to sources over at the Daily Caller, they obtained nearly all of her emails. Now, they didn't hack in and steal them all at once, the way Russia's accused of doing. Apparently, they hacked into the server and they embedded code in the server, which basically generated a copy. Every time she sent a mail or received a mail, copies were made and forwarded them to the Chinese company in real time. So now this Chinese company's got the goods on Hillary Clinton. They can blackmail her. Obviously an intelligence operation. Remember when Guccifer was testifying about being inside Hillary Clinton's email server, he said, first of all, it was very easy to get on in. And second of all, while he was there, he saw at least 10 other IPs just prowling around looking at files. Now, when I was a kid, which was a long time ago, the Republicans had the reputation for being the warmongers. They wanted to go to war. They wanted to go to war. And the Democrats were always, no, let's work on peace and, take care of our country, take care of our people. And this article that's over on the original antiwar.com is saying these days mainstream liberals are just as hawkish as Republicans. In fact, more so. Rachel Maddow and her fellow progressives at MSNBC and CNN are coming across like hysterical neocons. It's all Russia all the time. Russia, 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 Russia. And they're still trying to push on this deal that the president colluded with Russia during the 2016 election, even though there is no proof of it. And Mueller has found nothing in 18 months actually going on 20 months of looking at this stuff. The corporate media is still the same. Trump is a stooge of Putin, and the U.S. must brace itself for an impending, inevitable conflict with the Russians. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, polls are showing they're not getting a lot of traction with all of this nonsense. The American people are now very skeptical. They are not as naive as they were back in the 50s and 60s. And more than that, they're just tired of war. And I think many of them who have studied the situation seriously are concerned that ultimately we could lose this one. We could lose this one even if we win it. We could have a Pyrrhic victory. Both sides get destroyed. One leader gets to stand up and wave his flag and say, I did it, I did it. There's nothing but ash all around. We've had another incident of hat snatching over at Union Mine High School. There was this student who got very upset over a classmate's Trump MAGA hat and just snatched it off the student's head. 17-year-old senior Joanna Butler tried to defend her action by saying she was making a political statement. Violence is not a political statement. And apparently she also slapped her teacher when the teacher tried to intervene. All of this got caught on a cell phone, and now she's facing battery charges, which I think is a good thing, because this encouragement of violence against conservatives has got to stop. Now, do you remember back when Trump was campaigning and there were all these celebrities who said they were going to move to Canada if Trump was elected? And up in Canada, they were saying, oh, we're printing up all these extra visas and residence permits and all the rest of it. We had people like Bryan Cranston and Samuel L. Jackson, Lena Dunham, Neve Campbell, Cher, Miley Cyrus, Barbara Streisand, Neo, Amy Schumer, Chelsea Handler, Whoopi Goldberg. Not one of them ever actually moved. They're all still here in the United States of America. Golly gee, golly gee, golly gee. Okay, we're going to take a break here, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go right to the phones to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, you got B-2 bombers en route to Honolulu from Whitman. I don't know if you heard about that yet.
No, I didn't. Let me look out the window, make sure they're not coming from me.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see anything.
They're not there yet.
Oh, okay, good.
Mike, you know what's crazy about the North Korea thing? We never had a peace deal. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't trust. I live here and I don't trust my government. So if I don't trust my government, these people shouldn't. You know, like North Korea or Russia. I mean, come on now. You know, I mean, we're all, you know, we've all been around a while, so we know the routine. So, I mean, North Korea, if they're smart, and I think they are, they know this was all a ruse, you know, because look they just decided to say, well, we're not going to deal with them anymore. North Korea could have got like 90% given, and the U.S. would give like nothing, or 1%. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a scam.
That's unfortunately become the pattern of the United States. And when Kim Jong-un was having his meeting with Trump, and basically Kim Jong-un played Donald Trump, because all of a sudden Kim Jong-un was elevated to the status of a world leader, you know, equal to Trump, and at least in the eyes of the other Asian countries. But Kim Jong-un has to see how the U.S. has repeatedly done the same thing. You go to a country and you say, if you will get rid of your weapons of deterrence, we promise we will not invade. And then they invade. They did it to Iraq. They've done it to Syria. They did it to, I mean, again, all over the place.
And Mike, with Turkey, I keep telling people and you to go on to the Duran on YouTube. Basically, you know, Putin met with not only the defense minister of Turkey, and the foreign minister, he met with the intelligence, the head of the intelligence agency over there. So that's unheard of, because what they say, you usually, if you're Putin, meet with the president, or our foreign minister meets with theirs, like Bolton did, or vice versa. But they actually were in a meeting with the Turkish intelligence, in charge of it. So there's something going on for Putin to meet with all of these, including the defense minister of Russia.
Well,
so
remember Putin's background. Remember Putin's background. He's an intelligence officer himself. He used to run the KGB, so he probably wants to talk to people who speak his language in terms of evaluating what's really going on. The meetings with the prime minister and everything, I'm sure there's a lot of negotiating and deal-making going on, but to get to the real nuts and bolts, and for any of these high-level meetings, there's always a lot of back-channel stuff going on. They'll have the formal meetings, but the real deal-making is done out of sight of the public.
Because, Mike, isn't that in the northwest of Syria?
Yes.
So is Turkey in that area? That's what I want to know.
Are you talking Idlib or Afrin?
Idlib.
Idlib. Okay, well, stay on the line. We got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking with Dustin in New Jersey about Idlib. And Idlib is in northwestern Syria. It's way, way over, very close to the coast. So I don't know to what extent Turkey is involved there or has an interest there. Right now, though, with what's going on around Afrin, I imagine relations between Syria and Turkey are headed down.
Remember Russian intelligence? Because Russian intelligence is pretty good. Intercepted, communiques between there was going to be the coup in Turkey. So I'm thinking maybe Turkey, because they have a pretty good intelligence agency when it comes to boots on the ground there, in Syria and that border area, that maybe. Yeah, this is just Turkey's not dealing with this anymore. Maybe this is a U.S. operation, or Britain, especially Britain or France, Mike, with this next chemical attack. Because all the chess pieces are being moved around now.
No question.
Can see that, right? I mean,
no question.
So I'm thinking, Mike, Turkey maybe is telling them, because remember Russia came out and says that there was like a couple chlorine canister tankers or whatever that were being moved into position. And I believe you yesterday, I think you said there was, or somebody called in, they said there was missing townspeople. So
missing children.
They'll use, yeah.
Missing
so Mike,
children.
Mike, they'll use them.
Yes, they
They'll
will.
use those bodies, and yeah. What does that tell you about the West, Mike? You know what I mean? To do that kind of, you know what I mean? They're doing that obviously intentionally, but what does that tell you about just their mentality? It's a garbage, I mean,
well,
it's like
whatever their mentality is, it says they don't think much of our mentality because, gassing a bunch of kids, that's almost designed to provoke the maximum shock so that we won't think about what we're being told. But that's the only reason to do it. And as I was saying earlier, if Assad was stupid enough to use chemical weapons at this point when he's already won the war, why use them on civilians? Why use them on children especially? Why not use them on the enemy? Assad is not going to use chemical weapons. And I'm seeing in posts all over the place, articles in all the foreign press, everybody knows this is going to be a U.S. false flag followed by a major U.S. attack into Syria because the U.S. doesn't want to admit they lost.
And remember, he gave up his weapons. That was all officially, it was all official because they brought those weapons to a ship off the coast that were destroyed. It's a specialty ship.
Yep.
And that was all signed. So all this is going on is from the terrorists that Saudi Arabia, Israel, Britain, United States, and France has been arming, Mike. And I have to throw in Canada there. Not that they're arming them with chemical weapons, but Canada is complacent in this same, and so is a lot of the EU. I mean, they're complacent with this because they're all friends with Saudi Arabia, and these jihadis. Because remember, Mike, I called the other day. I said almost 90,000 jihadis were killed. Well, what about maybe another 100,000 or whatever, 10,000? Well, they got to be coming from somewhere, people. You know, what's the majority? They're coming from Britain, France, elements in the Caucasus, and Saudi Arabia, Mike. That's an army size. I mean,
Yes, that's exactly what it was. It was an army.
That's all I got to say, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over to Tom in Connecticut. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Tom, are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Remember those trillions that were missing from the Pentagon and that evidently started the first ever audit of the Pentagon?
Yes.
I emailed my senator, who was on the Senate Armed Services Committee, Blumenthal.
Yep.
Right? So he gets back to me. Thank you for your message. He makes no mention of my question, which is classic political tactic. In the middle of his response, he says, this final defense bill secures significant increased investments in high-priority programs critical to our nation's defense and Connecticut's economy, including submarines, the F-35, and helicopters, which are the New London electric boat. Then we got Sikorsky, and then we got, I don't know who's working on the F-35 here. $26.5 billion in defense contracts is coming to Connecticut. So he feels he's done his job, evidently.
Yes.
And how do you unwind? See, this is the whole thing about bringing home the bacon. You know, especially the F-35. I think that I heard that 46 separate states have significant manufacturing jobs tied to this turkey.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So, you know, it's very disappointing to try and figure out how, let alone the fraud and corruption, which I tried to get some kind of answer out of him, that he may have some concern about that. But, you know, this is just, it's so sad that our country is so deeply involved in jobs tied to these things.
Yes, it is. Well, it's about all we know how to make anymore, and we don't even really do a good job about that. But you're right.
The crap that we make falls apart. It's crap.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was just my little riff for today. So I don't know where else it goes, but thanks for taking the call, and take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network. And back to the phones to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mark, are you there?
Oh, yeah. Hi. I'm sorry, Mike. I was in the other room. Yeah, right here.
Got to stay on that phone.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Hey, listen to Mike. A couple of things. One, you were just talking about the that guy Andre there in Ukraine. You know who wrote this story and interviewed this guy is Lee Stranahan of who's now on fault lines in the morning on Sputnik TV, on Sputnik Radio. I mean, this guy Garland Nixon and Lee Stranahan used to be for Breitbart, but Breitbart fired him because he was too good for them. You know, he knew too much. He's still covering. He's had a lengthy interview with this guy. So more and more is coming out about what really is going on. Problem is, the mainstream media is just not reporting on it. Okay, you finally got it, but and it's in the foreign press, obviously in the Russian press, but it isn't. He's trying to get it out. He's trying to get. I'm trying the best I can. Every time I see it, I just share. But so far, it doesn't look like he's been having much success in getting this out. He's been working on this, what's happened in Ukraine, for over a year. That's one of the reasons he was fired from Breitbart, because they told him basically to quash it. And also he was talking about CrowdStrike, and they were telling him to quash that also. So that's pretty much as far as that goes. The other thing is about Syria now. We got to stop this. We got to try to, we got to try to call congressmen, call whoever else, and say we know what's going on. We're not stupid. People in this country are not that stupid anymore. We're not going to buy this stuff. We're not going to get dragged into another war. And if Russia gets into it, that could be it. Like I said, there would be if that happens and it gets to the worst scenario, which is of course nuclear, nobody's going to win. This world would probably be kind of like that movie with Mel Gibson there in Australia. What was it called? Road Warrior. Maybe
Road
like
Warrior. Yeah.
Or maybe Denzel Washington in the Book of Eli.
Yes.
That's basically what the world, if there was human beings would survive at all. That's pretty much what it would be. And we better get wise because this could escalate and escalate. I understand the Russians now moved a big fleet in there.
Yes.
So they may not be playing around this time. They may not let it happen. And they think we could just kill a leader of a country like Assad, to take him out or something like that. What we do to them, they can do to us. But it's always been known you don't kill another country's president. You don't do that. Even in the times of the Cold War, we might have had somebody knocked off like Allende in Chile. Well, our people didn't do it. They were hired probably by the CIA or whoever, Chileans to do it. But this would be extremely arrogant to just bomb the palace and kill the president of a country that's done nothing to us. We'd be opening the door to a lot of stuff. Not to mention the possibility of World War III.
We would be. I mean, if the U.S. were to attack Damascus and target, Assad, then the U.S. has set a precedent that nations that don't like us don't have to go to war with us. They just have to bomb Washington, D.C., which I would hate to see happen because there's a lot of cool museums there that are still on my bucket list.
They don't just have to bomb them. All they have to do is wait till, for instance, get a good shot at the president, the vice president, or secretary of state. And they don't even necessarily have to do it in the United States. They tour other countries, and that would be when we're at the weakest, when a president would be at the pretty much at the mercy of the host of the foreign country. So they could do a lot of things. Wouldn't be pretty. Now I'm wondering whether the Russians would just think that the Sixth Fleet this time if we do this. I think they have the capacity to do it, and I think, like you said, their weapons seem to be better than ours these days. They have those S-4 missiles that if they have them in, and I have a feeling they're in country now, they could be shooting down our planes. Question is, what will we do in response? Because I don't see the people in this country ready to back up a war like this. Not at this point.
No, I don't. And that's why we have to be on guard for another major false flag. Back on 9/11, about that time, it emerged that there had been an alternative plan, which was to have Al-Qaeda terror attacks in multiple countries all on the same day. And this gets back to that odd story about the caves behind the church in that town in France, because it's going to take something really big to get ordinary people back on that war wagon. Because everybody I talk to around here, we've got this high per capita density of military people. They are not ready to back up this government in more wars of aggression.
I'm concerned that they might try something like the sum of all fears, where, well, of course, it wasn't the U.S. government that it was European Nazis, I think it was, that supposedly did that, but that they actually might do something like that. They might bomb a city, an American city, blame it on and blame it on Russia, or blame it on China, or something like that, or even blame it on Iran, and that in order to get the people really riled up. I'm really concerned that there's nothing. These people are evil, Mike. I really believe these people are evil. People in charge of this country right now, the people, this deep state, they're evil. I don't respect them. I don't look at them as my leadership, the leadership of this country. I feel as if we're actually, being occupied by foreign power.
We are.
An evil, almost like Nazi Germany or Soviet Union took us over, but
Yep.
And they really have they don't have any use for us either, other than to use our military to do their dirty work, because they know they couldn't use any other military in the world. So they figure they can get away with using ours. It is something we got to stand up against, Mike. We got to stop them. We cannot let them. The word has to get out. I'm trying my best. I talk to people. I push. I share everything I can. I've been threatened by Facebook a couple of times already, putting too many Alex Jones show, video, stories out there. I'm just doing that because I know they don't want Jones at all on this, so I'm pushing every story from InfoWars I can. So they threaten, basically that, they're not going to tolerate this. I forget their exact words, but I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop. You want to kick me off Facebook? I'll find some other way. I also share it with Twitter. I do everything I can. I talk to people. I say I tell people what's going on and pass the word. You're not going to silence us, Mike. If I have to, personally, I think if we have to speak in smoke signals, we have to send up smoke signals to communicate, we'll do it. We're not going to watch the mainstream news. We're not going to get our news from the mainstream news. Mainstream news is like turning on it, you get more news from a comic book. And by the way, I include Fox News in that also, other than Tucker Carlson, who sometimes I watch because the guy seems to really, get it to a degree.
Yeah.
But other than, it's a total joke. I did see some of it today with this. I saw the other bum there, Lindsey Graham, the other warmonger, talking about McCain there because I was at the gym and it was right there in front of me on TV, with the monitor there, with the, giving the captions and all.
Yep.
So, I couldn't help it. But I'm fed up with that too. I believe in God. I believe you have a soul, and I believe your soul goes to Him, and He then decides. He makes His judgment, and it's up to Him to judge whoever goes up, dies and goes to see Him at that point. However, I'm going to judge, but I will. That doesn't mean I can't judge what McCain did on this earth. And I think he was behind just about every evil the last maybe 10, 15, 20 years. He had his filthy hands in it. He was a warmonger, and he was he would support the worst type of Islamist terrorists in the Middle East to try to overthrow secular, decent government. And he also supported the worst type of, not neo-Nazis, actual Nazis in the Ukraine, including that guy Banderas, what's his name? The Banderas unit there, who was named after a war criminal, Stephen Banderas.
Yep.
Back in World War II. He was bad news, and same thing with Graham. Graham is another bum. The problem is he seems to be smuggling up to Trump now, and Trump just doesn't seem bright enough to understand who these people are and what they're about. That's pretty much it, Mike. I think whatever else you have to say on here, on here. Okay.
Okay. Well, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to let you go here. It's really unfair to point to just one person or even just a handful and say it's all their fault. Because it's like Roger was saying earlier, it's systemic. The evils committed by the Nazis were committed by all the Nazis, not just by Adolf Hitler. The evils committed by all of the Soviet government were committed by all of the Soviet government, not just Stalin. And unfortunately, the evils being committed by the U.S. government are being committed by everybody in the U.S. government, and not just by John McCain or Bill Clinton or Donald Trump or whoever. So, anyway. Story just came on out. This is, again, from Russia Today. Apparently, a large supply of chemicals has been delivered to the militants in Syria's Idlib with the assistance of the White Helmets aid group. Poisonous chemicals, I should point out there. And the chemicals were delivered to an arms depot used by the militant group Ahrar al-Sham, accompanied by the 8 members of the White Helmets organization. And they were met by 2 high-ranked Ahrar al-Sham commanders. Yeah, it may be happening this weekend. It may be happening this weekend. And it's amazing. We all see what it is. We all see what's happening. And we can't stop it from happening. All right, let's talk about the economic news here a little bit. Story coming out of Zero Hedge on how the tectonic plates of geopolitics are starting to shift. And it starts out saying that the peak of the American empire has already come and gone. That's certainly true. Been like a year and a half, and startup companies in this country still cannot build a decent rocket engine. We're still having to buy them from Russia. Quite a bit different from the 60s and 70s when we built very good rocket engines. But the only thing holding the U.S. empire in a position of advantage, I'm not even going to say supremacy, is that dollar hegemony. But that's coming apart. Now, U.S. leaders have always used the dollar as a weapon. But recent years, geopolitical rivals and long-standing allies are coming to an increasing understanding that the unipolar role played by the U.S. in the world's centralized financial system is way past its expiration date. And yes, it is. Yes, it is. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about how America's peak as an empire has come and gone. And they're trying to bring back the glory days, if not total world conquest, then at least a new Cold War, and to get the world back to using the dollar as the global reserve currency. But there's really no need for that. Now, at the end of World War II, when Bretton Woods was signed, and most accounts were still being settled in boxes of paper notes or gold and silver bars, having a single recognizable global currency did make sense. But in today's world of instantaneous global financial payment and confirmation, having a single currency is an obsolete idea. And yet the U.S. is still committed to pushing that idea forward. Now, as you know, Donald Trump has come to a new trade agreement with Mexico, which popped up the stock market, and everybody's going, huzzah, huzzah. And unfortunately, this deal replaces NAFTA. And so at this point, Canada got left out. And I'm sure the Canadian government and economists are wondering what happened and how they got played. Now, supposedly the U.S. is saying that, if Canada wants to come on in, yeah, they can. But it was rather rude, I think, and ill-considered for Trump to simply arbitrarily pull out of NAFTA, like he did the nuclear deal, and make a deal with Mexico without involving Canada in the process. I think that's going to cause some diplomatic friction. Okay, Barclays is the first bank to sell commercial paper linked to the LIBOR alternative. Now, you know, LIBOR has been hit with a lot of scandals related to rigging. But Barclays is issuing this commercial paper tied to the benchmark which regulators hope will replace the scandal-plagued London Interbank Offered Rate, the so-called Secured Overnight Financing Rate, or SOFR. And apparently, last Friday, Barclays sold $525 million of the short-term debt linked to SOFR. And so they have a new economic instrument to play with. But, you know, somebody will find a way to rig SOFR the way they rig LIBOR, because that's what they do, because none of them ever get sent to prison or anything like this. Another big retailer is starting to have to close stores, and this one is Victoria's Secret, which basically is another reason not to bother going to the shopping malls anymore. But we're seeing all these iconic retailers closing. Claire and I, in the regular course of our travels around this part of town, we drive right by what used to be the Toys R Us building. And I remember we went by it when they were taking the Toys R Us sign down, and it felt kind of sad, because Toys R Us are something I grew up with. And but we're seeing more and more of these iconic retailers shut down, and you can't look at what's going on out there in Retail Mageddon and say this economy is healthy. I mean, it's great for the one percenters, it's great for the military-industrial complex, it's great for Israel, but for the rest of us, it is terrible. Story coming out, apparently Wells Fargo is in trouble again. They're looking at major layoffs, more scandals, and they too are caught up in this latest massive housing bubble. It's like they repeated the mistakes of 2007, 2008 all over again. Because it makes a fast buck. Because when the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud imploded, the bankers didn't pay for it. The taxpayers did. Yes, the Lehman Brothers went out of business, but for the most part, the banks were all saved by TARP and QE and all this other stuff, because protecting the banks and protecting the money is much more important than taking care of the American people and what's good for them. And there's more bad news here for Donald Trump. Apparently, the goods trade deficit is surging, and it surged the most in over 3 years, meaning the tariffs are working against us. And imports rose 0.9% in July, while exports fell 1.7%. We got to take the focus off of tariffs and really start making a Manhattan Project style commitment to rebuilding our factories so that once again we are one of the world's finest manufacturers, like we were going into World War II. And that was a key difference. Our manufacturing capacity was huge. We could make things. We could, produce the ships and airplanes and weapons faster than the Nazis could blow them up, or the Japanese. We don't have that manufacturing anymore. It's one of the 4 M's that we are missing to go into a major war with a military peer. Manufacturing, manpower, money, and moral rightness. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And turning to the immigration refugee issue, apparently over in Germany, this mother of a 3-year-old boy made a viral video. It's already had 2 million views, basically complaining her son cannot socialize with the other kids in the daycare center because only 2 of the kids in the daycare center out of 25 can speak German. And this mother, Lean Kroch, basically takes aim at German politicians like Merkel for what she claims is a botched immigration policy, which is forcing her 3-year-old who has no immigrant background to adjust to an alien environment in the daycare center. And there is the missing component in all this, because the open borders people are out there saying, we should be sorry for the refugees, we should be sensitive to them, we should be concerned about their feelings. And yet when somebody says, what about the feelings of those of us who've been here all along? It's, oh, you're being racist, you're just being heartless, you're being cruel. Walls are bad, walls are bad. I understand heaven has a wall and a very strict vetting process. That was just sent to me in the email by one of our listeners. And it's a valid point. Sometimes walls are good things. Now, over in Bavaria, they basically have gotten tired of the refugee situation. And so Bavaria has launched their own new border patrol. And they've already logged over 1,750 civil and criminal indictments in this month, which is motivating Merkel and her allies to backtrack a bit from the open borders policies. So these Bavarian border agents have arrested over 500 wanted people and stopped over 220 illegal attempts to cross the border, according to Bavaria's Interior Minister Joachim Herrmann. Now, the agency was able to accomplish this despite the fact that when this border patrol was created on July 18th, the German federal government severely restricted its powers. I think their success is based on the fact they're in a target-rich environment. The refugees are just everywhere. The wanted criminals are everywhere. Germany is still seeing riots between the German Nazis, nationalists, patriots, Antifa, punks, and black blockers, along with the refugees after this German man was stabbed to death. This isn't working out the way Soros and his people told us it was going to work on out. We were all going to blend together and become multicultural and hug each other and sing Kumbaya. Not working. Over in Huddersfield, England, 31 men and 1 woman have been charged with sexual crimes, including the trafficking and rape of girls as young as 12 years old, along with the facilitating of sexual abuse. And 31 of the arrested are Muslim refugees. So are you feeling culturally enriched yet? Now, getting on back to that horrible shooting down in Jacksonville, the leftists, of course, immediately leaped on it. Oh, we've got to have gun control. We've got to have gun control. And as it turns out, he was able to legally purchase the firearms up there in Baltimore because his 2 hospital stays for mental issues, he voluntarily went in. And apparently the rules governing the background checks are it only counts as a hit against you if you are involuntarily committed to a mental hospital. I think that rule needs to be looked at. And of course, it's known he was being prescribed antipsychotic and antidepressant medications. We know there's an issue with those. And of course, that area where this was all being done was a gun-free zone, which is where 98% of mass shootings occurs. Now, transgender activist Charlotte Clymer tweeted a list of gun laws from the state of Florida and just a screed about how these have got to change, these got to change. Then, of course, it turned out the shooter bought the firearms in Maryland. Now, Maryland actually has a very strict set of gun laws and a process for buying a handgun. It's very complicated. You have to be fingerprinted with the state police. You have to submit an application to the police to receive a handgun qualification license. You have to take a firearms safety course. I'm in agreement with that one. You have to verify your handgun qualification license to a federal firearms licensed dealer, submit an ATF background check, and then wait 7 days before you can purchase the handgun. A recent study from the Cato Institute ranked Maryland as the 46th worst state for gun rights, with only Massachusetts, New Jersey, California, and Hawaii as ranking as more hostile states for gun owners. Now, apparently, Electronic Arts, which was running this event, they're canceling it. The CEO of Electronic Arts says he's going to cancel the remaining Madden Classic qualifier events after these 2 people were fatally shot and 10 others injured at the Madden NFL 19 tournament in Florida. And in a statement yesterday evening, Andrew Wilson said, "We've made a decision to cancel our 3 remaining Madden Classic qualifier events while we run a comprehensive review of safety protocols for competitors and spectators. We'll work with our partners and our internal teams to establish a consistent level of security at all of our competitive gaming events." Good thing to do, little late, but good thing to do. Here's my question. Every venue I go to these days has a metal detector at the door. How did this guy get the guns in there? So, apparently the law firm Morgan & Morgan has already filed a lawsuit on behalf of one of the victims of the mass shooting. And they held a press conference, in fact, just a little while ago. It was on the TV. So the lawsuits are going to be flying on that one. Now, I'm all in favor of gun rights, but I'm in agreement people with demonstrable mental problems should not be allowed to have firearms. And in my book, being on antidepressants means you've got mental problems. And I'm not the only person who's out there. Patriot Rising came out with a story saying yet another mass shooter that had his mind warped by antipsychotic and antidepressant medications. And this keeps happening over and over, and yet nobody in the corporate media will ever dare to call for a federal investigation into the pharmaceutical companies. That's because the big drug corporations spend billions of dollars advertising their product on TV, radio, and newspapers. And if you were to say, we think maybe this medication is dangerous, the gravy train would stop. Congress actually held hearings once about the link between antidepressants and violent behavior, and in the end, they did nothing. Now, the problem with antidepressants, where it gets into trouble, is that it can impede impulse control. Now, obviously, this David Katz had just lost his tournament, was very angry, and he got the impulse to kill these two people. Now, normal human beings who are not on these drugs would go on out and walk it off. Maybe hit the bar. The problem with being on antidepressants is you get an idea in your head and you can't control it. Over at ssristories.org, there is one of the many case studies. Basically talks about this kid who tried to commit suicide. And they intervened, they got to him, they saved him, and after it was over, they said, "Why'd you do it?" And he said, "I don't know. The idea just popped into my head and I couldn't help myself." That's the danger of these medications. And I know for a lot of people, these medications can be very helpful, but there are far too many of these adverse reactions that are costing lives, whether it's mass shootings or suicide. And I know from first-person experience how weird that can be. Because my doctor, many years ago, before I even met Claire, put me on these medications, and it was a horrible, horrible experience. I'll never take them ever, ever again. So let's talk about deplatforming and censorship, because now Trump appears to be finally noticing what's going on. And he's doubling down on the claim that Google is suppressing conservative voices and hiding good news. And he's saying the situation is going to be addressed. And Trump is now claiming Google is rigging its results to show only bad news stories about him. That any good news about the Trump administration is being buried about it. Now, Google denied earlier that politics has got nothing to do with it. How silly. How silly. Politics doesn't play any part in the algorithms. And without some third party looking at those algorithms, it's impossible to say one way or the other. But Google is saying, nope, we're not biasing our search results based on politics. However, the heads of all the corporate social media have now been called on in for a hearing before Congress on the 5th of September. That would be next Tuesday, I think. Meanwhile, Larry Klayman, late of Judicial Watch, currently of Freedom Watch, is filing a lawsuit against YouTube and Facebook for discrimination against conservatives. So this is really starting to heat up, and I think that Google and Facebook and Twitter weren't expecting the reaction to be this strong. Now, from their point of view, they only have to keep doing this until November, and then they can start working to try and recover their audience, which I don't think is going to happen. People are feeling very burned and betrayed. That's why Facebook got caught, once again, artificially inflating its reader numbers. Story out of Liberty Blitzkrieg. Censorship is what happens when powerful people get scared. And it's all out in the open now. Facebook isn't even hiding the fact that it's outsourcing much of its fake news analysis to the Atlantic Council, a think tank funded by NATO, Gulf states, and defense contractors. So you're going to get, all the war is really fantastic stuff. And anybody saying, I think these wars are a bad idea. Oh, das ist der fake news. Das ist der fake news. Now let's take a look at the so-called community standards by which some people are allowed to tweet and some are not. Now, this has to do with a guy named Peter Van Buren. And apparently Peter Van Buren has a source inside Twitter that was able to find out exactly which tweets got him banned for life from Twitter. And he tried to verify it. Official Twitter will not respond to the inquiries. So he was accused of dehumanizing several reporters, targeted abuse, using words to offend them into silence. And the whole series of threads started when Trump accused the press of being enemies of the people, followed by Glenn Greenwald reminding us how the media enables America's wars. So far, so good. So he was responded to by this Sulam Anderson, who came on out and was talking about how her father, was a POW, and therefore she's got gravitas. And so Peter Van Buren came on back and said, your father's in prison decades ago has nothing to do with Trump except to allow you to falsely conflate the two and claim faux virtue from the ignorant. And then he goes on to say he spent 24 years in government service, including a year in Iraq where he was shot at and mortared. So the argument just continued to build and build and build until finally Peter Van Buren made a comment about how Solum should really be taking a closer look at what's being reported rather than just worrying so much about, reporters' appearances. And that was the one that supposedly crossed the line, according to Twitter. Now, as a counterexample, Milan Ligius basically put up a tweet wishing death upon the National Rifle Association spokeswoman Dana Losh's children. And Twitter said, that's okay. Now, there was a huge backlash, and Twitter finally took it down. But there clearly is a bias there. There's a liberal bias there. The liberals are trying to become the one state party of the United States of America. They're out for blood. They want to get rid of all conservatism. Ben Garrison's website, Graphics, has been suspended. Right now he's posting his cartoons on social media until they start blocking them there. But apparently, it's all-out war. It is all-out war. Which is why Republic Broadcasting does need your help. Interestingly enough, Brown University had put up a press release announcing a study that basically investigated if teens identifying as trans were yielding to peer pressure rather than to actual mental biological urges. We know there's a lot of peer pressure out there. We've seen it. They're out there pushing this. No, you're not a boy, you're not a girl, you're trans, you've got to be trans. A lot of peer pressure, social pressure. And so apparently trans activists complained, and Brown University withdrew the press release, which was basically pointing to this research study from its own Brown University researcher about children who experienced what's called rapid onset gender dysphoria for the first time when they were hanging around one or more other friends who had become gender dysphoric and were transgender identified. It's peer pressure, and it's having a horrendous price. Over in Colorado, a 9-year-old boy killed himself 4 days into school after being bullied for coming out as gay. Now that is a tragedy then and there of itself, and it's even more of a tragedy if it turns out that he wasn't really gay, that he just said it because he thought it was cool and it was hip and everybody else is saying it. This nation has gone absolutely crazy. It's absolutely bonkers. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. So it's time to get into human-caused global warming because, yes, even though it is August 28th and summer is still technically underway, it is starting to snow. And there's Montana and Wyoming. In fact, one of our readers sent me a very beautiful photo of the snowy mountains there in Wyoming. And it's accumulating snow above 6,000 feet, which is a surprise to a lot of the vacationers in the area. Now, Britain is coming up on a week of icy frost, mist, and heavy rain. But the story then goes on to say, don't worry. Global warming, we'll have an Indian summer, and it'll be warm in September. Maybe, maybe not. But a lot of people are looking at the weather patterns, and they're saying, it looks like the seasons are changing early. And apparently snow is falling in Alberta, Canada. And here's where it gets to the good part. The Farmer's Almanac prediction. Now, for those of you who are farmers, you understand the Farmer's Almanacs have an amazing track record of predicting the overall weather. Now, they don't predict day to day to day to day, but they predict when you should start planting, when you should be thinking about getting the harvest in, and they have been just bang on spot correct. So, this year's Farmer's Almanac is predicting an early, bone-chillingly cold and snowy winter. They're even describing it as teeth-chattering cold. And I've been saying exactly the same thing. We're all looking at the same signs. Now, all right. This one was a little out of place in the talking points. A human rights coalition is now demanding that Google end the Chinese censorship project. Well, I think somebody needs to demand Google end the American censorship project. Google seems to be doing this everywhere for any government that asks. And so these 14 groups, which include Amnesty International, the Committee to Protect Journalists, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and Human Rights Watch, urge Google to call off the controversial project codenamed Dragonfly. But again, the perception coming out of this is that Google is doing this only in China, and I don't think that's accurate. I think the powerful have become very afraid. They've lost control of the minds of America. They can't sell us a new war. They can't hide the corruption any longer. And they are afraid, and that's why they're trying to bring down censorship in some kind of a way where somebody can't mount a First Amendment lawsuit. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back with hour number 3. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So please call on in. Help me get through this hour. And people are sending me a lot of stuff. I'm trying to process it through. Okay, this is about that indoctrination. It's a video. I'll have to look at it later here. Okay, so we just got done talking about Google being pressured to end censorship. I don't think it's going to happen. I think we're right into Aldous Huxley and George Orwell with all of this stuff. Over in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as you're aware, they've got an outbreak of Ebola, and the death rate is starting to spike rather dramatically. And there are questions being raised. Was this an accidental outbreak? Apparently there is concern that it might be a depopulation device. And you know there are people who think having a lot of money gives them the right to talk about depopulation. And we do understand Malthusian theory holds that depopulation, or at least zero population growth, is a necessity to control a species, in this case human beings, that reproduces and consumes natural resources without limits. Now, this was a policy adopted early on by the communists, as far back as Marx and Lenin. And then you had Edward House, Woodrow Wilson, Kissinger, and Bill Gates, Al Gore, and so forth. And I understand there's a population problem. There always will be, because sex is much more fun than dying. But there are really only two ways to depopulate the planet. War is one answer, and disease is another. Now, the advantage of war is that you get to decide who dies. The disadvantage of war is that not much is left for those who are still alive, unless you're using neutron enhancement weapons. Disease is another. But diseases have been indiscriminate. They go after everybody. But there has been talk about ethnically sensitive pathogens going back for several years now that were developed where you could drop these germs onto a country and only people of a certain ethnicity would get sick and die. Whether that's really out there or deployable, we don't really know. But there have been questions about Ebola ever since it first emerged. Nobody has ever found a natural reservoir for it. They don't know where it comes. Now, it's a single-strand RNA filovirus. It mutates quite a bit because of the way RNA falls back on itself and loops it around. But this article appearing in Zero Hedge is raising the possibility, is this the start or at least an experiment in depopulation using Ebola in Africa? To which I would add, look at all the other Ebola outbreaks that took place in Africa. They were always in these very, very remote places, hard to get out of. So it was contained until it burned itself out. There was only one time when somebody got from an infected zone to a city, and that was this nurse Mayinga who got into Kinshasa. But by the time she reached the city, all of a sudden she was non-infectious. Now this Ebola seems to have a lethality rate somewhere around 50, 60%. So it's not the Mayinga strain, which was 98%. And they're all over the place with this thing. The Ebola restin virus is absolutely harmless to humans, but it will wipe out monkeys. So, is somebody implementing National Security Study 2000? We know a lot of very powerful people think that there are too many human beings on this planet, including the ones who put up the Georgia Guidestones. So, anyway. Now, we were talking yesterday about these Irish church-run orphanages, homes for unwed mothers, and how badly the women and the children were being treated by these supposed men and women of God. And Tuam is about to get a real boost in the public eye thanks to Liam Neeson. But it wasn't confined to Ireland by any stretch of the imagination. You had the resident school scandal up in Canada, and now there's a new scandal surfacing in the state of Vermont. And this one surrounds the St. Joseph's Orphanage in Burlington, Vermont. And it closed down in 1974, but some of the children who lived there from the 1930s through the 70s have come forward to just talk about horrific torture, sexual abuse. In one case, a witness, Sally Dale, claimed that she saw a nun throw a boy to his death from an upper window. So what the heck is going on with this stuff? I don't understand it. First of all, I don't understand how anybody can be cruel to a child. And second, I don't understand how people who purport to be the earthly manifestation of the ultimate moral authority of the universe can behave like this. There was an HBO documentary that came on out a while back, maybe it's still searchable, and it was Max Mea Culpa, Silence in the House of the Lord. And it was about this home for deaf children, where the children were being abused. And the children couldn't tell their parents what was going on because the parents didn't know sign language. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're going to take a phone call from Fred in Arkansas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I would like to rant for a couple of minutes about the city of Chicago and how the city of Chicago got to where it is right now.
Rant away.
Would that be okay?
Rant away.
All right. I'm going to take you all the way back to the year 1960, and let me explain what Chicago was like in 1960. Up until about 60, black people stayed in their own neighborhoods. We had sort of like a de facto segregation policy where people just, went where they were very welcome, and they just sort of stayed in their own locations. And in fact, when Daley was the mayor, he used to talk about black people. He would say the denizens of the south side of Chicago. So it was kind of blatant, but I mean, that was the general thinking. Now, at that time, the Chicago public school system was financed out of taxes from a business neighborhood downtown called the Loop. So in other words, if you owned a business in the Loop and it was all big box stores, their local taxes would go to keep the schools in operation in Chicago. And so at that time, up until about 60, the schools were very, very well financed. They were just gorgeous places. The teachers made wonderful salaries, and they all got good pensions. Now, beginning in the early 1960s, Hollywood started to make movies called blaxploitation films.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that basically it's any movie that stars Pam Grier. And I remember one of the films I saw her in, she picked up a bar stool made out of wood and smashed it against a white woman for no specific reason. She was just demonstrating black rage, and the bar stool fell apart and the woman collapsed to the floor. So that was a typical blaxploitation movie, and they all starred Pam Grier. Now, what happened is when those movies started to make it to the movie theaters, for some strange reason, the people who owned the movie theaters in downtown Chicago started featuring those films. So what happened then is black people came out of their neighborhood and they went to the downtown community to watch these horrible films where they would all get psyched up about being violent towards white people. And the crime rate in downtown Chicago just skyrocketed. And it got to the point where white people were afraid to go downtown to buy anything. So the state of Illinois, their remedy was they erected a huge office building at one end of the Loop, the downtown shopping area, and they figured, well, it'll fill up with people on salaries, and they'll go out and they'll buy from the big box stores, and it'll save the Loop tax base. Well, it didn't work. The black on white violence was so fantastically intense that all of the big box stores emptied out. And as a result of that, the Chicago public school system just recently, not recently, but I mean, they've been in collapse for quite some time. So I know as a general rule, it seems like you want to blame the banks whenever there's a big failure, but Chicago was crashed by black on white violence. And of course, that petered out, it sort of like it drifted out to the rest of the state, so that all of the Illinois state employees basically have lost their pensions. And it has nothing to do with predatory banking, it's black on white violence. And right now in the Chicago public schools, there's a fantastic number of drug crimes, shootings in high schools, just things that I went to a Chicago public high school, and I used to shoot a .22 caliber rifle in the basement, every other month or so. And that's just, there's no such thing as having a firearm in a Chicago public school anywhere. So it's not predatory banks. Chicago was wealthy up until 60, and the state was wealthy. That's why the state employees went away from Social Security, and they got into state retirement programs, because Chicago was just, and the rest of the state was just flush with money. And it was all destroyed by black violence and these blaxploitation films. So please, you know what I'm saying is, you shouldn't blame all of the financial crashes on the banks, because very often things like this happen because of the cities are just unlivable. Now, wait, I'm almost done, but I want to make one more comment. The question is, why did I call in today? And I'm going to tell you why. I just came across an article on my Yahoo News feed, and the author of the news article says, "Isn't it terrible that we have to that a funeral for a drug lord in Chicago who was shot up in a drug gang shoot-up costs $5,000 or $6,000?" So in other words, the left-wing media is already saying that white taxpayers should now pay for the funerals of blacks who are killed in drug disputes. That's how crazy the left wing is. Now, I'll tell you what, my remedy is, if it was up to me, every time there's a drug shootout and blacks end up in the hospital, I think we should take a close look at their driver's licenses, and we should deduct the hospital costs from their EBT cards all their federal welfare programs. So that's what I would do. I would punish a high crime neighborhood by basically saying, okay, the hospital bills are going to be subtracted from your federal welfare benefits, and your benefits are going to go down until you stop committing all this crime. So that's my rant. What do you think? Should I just hang up, or you want to add something?
Stand the line here a little bit, because the one thing that I find fault with is that you narrow down on just trying to say it's all black violence and the black exploitation movies, when I think the issue is a lot more complex. And first of all, I haven't said it's just the banks and our private central banking that is responsible for the economic downturn, not just in Chicago, but across the entire country. There are a lot of overlapping factors, and I think what may have happened, if you remember back in the 1960s, where the FBI was deliberately trying to foment racial tension to basically keep the people divided during the protests over Vietnam, I'm seeing that these black exploitation films came out at about the same time the economy was starting to decline from other reasons outside, including the war budget, and that maybe these black exploitation films were put on out there to fan up racial tension, the way we have seen racial tension being fanned up in the streets of America just in the last couple of years. It's a great way to keep people under control, keep them hating each other. So knowing Hollywood's close relationship with the federal government, I don't think it's just a coincidence that that was happening, and I don't think it was just a coincidence that they were bringing those movies into the loop, which does seem to be a catalyst for having brought these two disparate groups together and triggering more and more of the violence. But you're absolutely right. Your chain of logic from that point forward is that, yeah, when you start getting a neighborhood going into decline, it's going to go all the way into decline. People who are making money, people who've got the means, they're going to leave. They're going to go someplace else. And we're seeing that a lot all across the United States, where there's a lot of what's so-called white flight out of the major cities and into the nation's rural areas. So I agree with most of what you said, except that I think there were probably some other factors involved as well.
Okay, well, let me add two more facts about black males. One is that a black male who marries a white woman is about 12 times more likely to murder his wife than a white guy married to a white woman. And the other issue is that black males are about 10 times more likely to have AIDS than white males, and they're about half the AIDS population. Now,
okay.
Let me tell you what AIDS is costing.
Fred, this seems like a gratuitous smear and bash going on here, and these statistics have got nothing to do with the economy. So thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to let you go here because you're going off on a tangent here. And I've read the statistics, we all have, but again, it's not always that simple. There's a lot of overlapping factors. Society is a very, very complicated machine. Okay, so the phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. Yesterday, we reported on a story where there were rumors that Pope Francis might actually resign. And apparently, there were stories that there was a coup in the Vatican to dethrone him because of a lot of the church hierarchy not agreeing with a lot of his more liberal policies. But apparently there's a confirming story. This is over at Leo Zagami, saying that the Pope is preparing to move back to Argentina amongst all these controversies. And apparently there's a lot of legal prep that has to be done because he didn't leave Argentina in the best of conditions. And so he's got political enemies back there, and he's obviously going to want to have some safety guarantees. But it means we may go through that whole festival of picking a new pope yet again. But I don't think that's going to help. I mean, when you have two popes resign like that, Pope Benny the Rat followed by Pope Francis, it tells you something is seriously broken in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. And again, this report out of Pennsylvania, the reports coming out of these homes for unwed mothers, there is something really wrong. And underneath all those white robes, there seem to be some very, very black hearts. Okay. Today, Missouri became the first state in the country to have an actual law on the books that prohibits food makers from using the word meat on anything other than animal flesh. And apparently this law is in response to manufacturers of what has been dubbed fake or non-traditional meat. There's a colorful little euphemism for you. Clean meat, also known as lab-grown meat, is made of cultured animal tissue cells, while plant-based meat is generally from ingredients such as soy, tempeh, and seitai, which is not meat at all. And yet there are a lot of products out there saying this is meat, and it isn't. So this new law forbids misrepresenting a product as meat that is not derived from harvested production, livestock, or poultry. Violators can be fined $1,000 and imprisoned for a year. Not really enough teeth in there. And I'm not sure what the attraction of the lab-grown meat is anyway, because having been a farm kid myself, it strikes me that raising cows and chickens and sheep and goat is a lot easier, a lot less labor intensive, a lot less expensive than trying to generate one in a laboratory. And given the horrendous mistakes that have been made in so many other areas of our synthetic biology industry, if you will, I don't think I would ever care to actually eat any of that. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials here. Please join me on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And I'm looking at the Fox News feed, and I agree Fox is no better than some of the others, but it's just force of habit. And they're talking about how there was this big debate going on up at the UN over the sanctions placed on Iran by the United States, which, by the United States' own admission, are designed to simply crush the country, shut down all of its oil exports, just wreck the place. And Iran is saying this is just the U.S. returning to neocolonialism. And the U.S. has fallen back on that old standby, well, we have to sanction Iran because they're supporting terrorists around the world, which, talk about the pot calling the kettle black here. You know, after all the support for ISIS and Al-Qaeda that we now know the United States was covertly doing. So I'm looking at this feed, and it's just all war, North Korea tensions, Iran, Syria. Yeah, I feel like something big is on the horizon, possibly could even get kicked off over the holiday weekend when Americans are distracted. Okay, we got a caller waiting on the line here. It's Debbie in Olympia. Aloha, Debbie. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I've enjoyed your website for years. I don't get radio here, so anyway, I saw an article. I thought, oh, this is kind of right up your alley, maybe. It's about China withholding samples of viruses for the H7N9 avian flu.
Yes.
And China used to provide samples to the CDC, and they haven't done so for about a year. And I just thought, well, you might have an interesting take on that.
Well, you know, I mean, there's been a lot of hostility building between China and the United States. There's the issue of Taiwan. There's the economic war that's going on. There's the issue with the South China Seas. And I would expect that China just doesn't particularly feel like cooperating with anything in the United States anymore. And it may just be as simple as that. I mean, these viruses are mutating on a fairly rapid basis anyway. But the last I heard, this latest avian flu outbreak, once again, did not turn out to be as bad as everybody claimed it was going to be. We were seeing it all over the corporate media. Oh, the flu is coming, get your shot. The flu is coming, get your shot. And but, yeah, unfortunately, China has a lot of technology that the United States really could use right now. And it's counterproductive to go on annoying them and just making them angry.
Yeah, I agree. It's like we're going out of our way not to build trust.
Yeah, that's very well put. That's exactly the way the U.S. is going. They're going the way of the bully. Do what we tell you or bad things will happen to you. And that's what they're trying to demonstrate again with Iran.
Yeah. Oh, boy. Yeah, the Middle East, just just terrible. And am I correct that China is investing pretty heavily in helping to develop infrastructure in Africa? And
yes,
we're doing a lot to develop war in Africa. That's just kind of my take on this.
You've got a good perception of it. I mean, Russia and China are making deals. They're making things. They're building. And the U.S. is just going around knocking everything down. It's almost like Donald Trump's plan to make America great again is to simply, smash all the other countries on Earth so they're less great. And it's a dumb way to do it. But if you really think about it, the United States doesn't really have a lot left to work with to make itself great again. We've allowed our manufacturing to decline over the last 30 years. We've destroyed our agricultural exports with this GMO experiment. The dollar hegemonic domination is coming to an end. We are an empire in decline. There's no two ways about it. And my fear is that this empire, somebody's going to say, we refuse to surrender, we'll just go out with a bang, and they'll start flinging missiles all over the place.
Yeah, it's really messed up. I worry for my children's future, and they're adults. It's sad. But I appreciate the information you put out there. There aren't a lot of places where you get this variety of information. So,
well, thank you.
Happy birthday for tomorrow.
Well, thank you very much here. And I worry for the future of the world and the world's children as well. And it has been very frustrating and painful over the last 24 years to just see the world deteriorate, to see all these wars at the hands of the United States, and to see the United States itself just seem to be going crazy, where the American people have stopped worrying about the economy and these wars that we're being driven into because they're too busy trying to figure out which restroom they're supposed to use.
Too true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, listen, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. And we're coming up here on yet another commercial break. We have another caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back after these few words from our sponsors. Stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Let's go to the phones to Frank in London. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. It's a long time I haven't spoken on your show. What my topic is how local government, that's boroughs in London, how they're trying to politicize the staff. Now, you're supposed to be sort of politically neutral, although yes, certain parties would have won seats to run a borough, but that's not the point. They set up a terrorist crime prevention. I couldn't even call it training. It was more like a lecture. Anyway, it was compulsory for us as a council staff to attend these lectures. Anyway, went there. There was a guy, Asian Muslim guy. He was lecturing to us about terrorists, what to look out for, etc., etc. Then I realized something. He's talking about anti-Semitism is on the rise in London now. I'm a Londoner, and I can tell you nowadays there is no such thing as a myth. And he said he supposedly saw an incident with two 13-year-old boys run after a rabbi and threw his hat off his head and then continue running. Now, how could you equate that with anti-Semitism? Two young boys, just being silly. They saw a man wearing a silly hat. We did things like that when we were kids.
Yes.
Right? That was one. So he was telling us about the difference with Al-Qaeda and who's smarter between Al-Qaeda and ISIS or something like that. So I'm listening tentatively. So I threw in a question, and I know this guy does not believe in his own BS that he's teaching. He's getting a nice wage for propagandizing stuff, but that's all it is. I asked him just at the end of the lecture, stroke training, whatever you want to call it, is Hezbollah or a terrorist group? And he said, yes, they are. Now, the reason why he paused a lot, because he wanted to make sure he said the politically correct things, because he wanted he had an agenda. He was given an agenda subtly. But this is what you get happening in local government across London. This is the kind of nonsense you're getting now. They're trying to politicize you. I thought I came just to have a lecture on crime prevention. Then you had all this. There was a lot more to it, but that was just a couple of examples that I managed, because most of us, when that lecture or training's finished, we couldn't remember 95% of what they told us to look out for. But this is what's going. This is what money, a lot of money being spent on these useless courses or whatever you want to call it. That's how our money, and that's where our taxpayers' money is going. That's what's happening.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we're at the stage right now of this hysterical propaganda where anybody that is opposed to us is simply, they're a terrorist. Whether it's Iran or Hezbollah or the Palestinians, they're painting this with a broad brush. You know, they're all terrorists. They all have to be destroyed, blah, 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 blah. And you're right, it is a huge amount of money. But the real goal there is to keep selling you this idea that we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. And it's really not that simple, because unfortunately in the current situation, it is the aggressive West that are the bad guys. And I laugh at this U.S. getting up there and screaming that Iran is supporting terrorism, when we know that the U.S. has been supporting terrorists in all kinds of countries as part of this regime change program.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks for your take on that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go and switch over to Don in Iowa. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. You're talking about the Catholic Church. Yeah, it looks like they're going straight down the drain. They don't know how to deal with it. But I wanted to recommend a couple of movies in case people haven't seen it yet. One was Spotlight with Michael Keaton. It was a good one. It was about the...
Yeah, I've mentioned that many times on the air, and it's an excellent, excellent movie.
And the other one is The Keepers, which is a documentary series. And this was even more incredible. It was about Baltimore, Maryland. There was a priest there. And remember, Maryland was originally the Catholic colony when it first started.
Yes.
The Catholic Church has always been very powerful. They're very much entrenched in Baltimore, especially back when this happened, like in it was in the 70s when she really fit in the late 60s when she. Anyway, what happened? The story. It's incredible to even think about what happened. This guy, superintendent of he was a priest. He's the superintendent of the girls' high school, and he would just rape all these girls. He'd call them on the loudspeaker, send so and so Mary Doe down to my office, and that's the way he'd rape them. It was unbelievable, and it was more than one, and they I don't think they'd be making all this up. I mean, why would they do that? This is what
we do have to be careful that we don't get into a witch hunt hysteria, because it can get out of control. And, I keep thinking back to the 1990s feminism, where women were so desperate for the media attention at being a rape victim. Rape became the second most falsely reported crime in the entire country. So we have to understand that Me Too runs both ways, because, women may want attention. They may see themselves as having their moment on TV. So we have to be careful. But unfortunately for the church, a lot of this stuff is documented, especially over at Tuam, where there are the remains of 800 children in that mass grave. That wasn't made up by anybody. That's not a special effect from a Hollywood studio. That's not somebody's little, rubber joke. That really did happen. And we know the same thing at the residential schools in Canada. So we do have to evaluate very carefully. But yeah, there's been a problem, and it's been a problem all the way along. And what has really changed is not that this is a sudden issue for the Catholic Church. They've been doing it all along. It's just that now, in the age of the internet and the independent media, such secrets cannot be kept from the public any longer, which is why they want to find a way to shut down the independent media.
Yeah, they don't know how to deal with it because they're just old-fashioned. They've done things the same way, like burying it under a load of BS forever, and that doesn't work anymore. But going back to the keepers, it was eventually a nun got murdered. A nun was apparently going to blow the whistle on all these rapes and stuff. She was murdered, and that murder was never solved. And but I recommend that movie. It's a mystery. You don't have to. You might not believe the people who are saying they got raped. But it's a real life documentary where they're talking to all these people that are still alive, and I think it's a great series. I'll let you go, Mike.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. And I'm not saying not to believe them. I'm just saying be very, very careful, because you can get this witch hunt hysteria overblown. There is something there. There has been something going on, and it's been going on for a very long time. And the Catholic Church, and by the way, it's not confined just to the Catholics. Other churches have these similar problems. But it just sort of became part of the background of what it was to be in the clergy, and they got used to it for century after century. But now it's out there, and they're going to have to adjust and adapt to the new reality, because it's not appropriate behavior. Okay, now you probably remember a guy by the name of, hang on just a second, I have to reset something. There we are. Probably remember a guy named Cody Wilson. Now, he became famous for designing a 3D printable gun. The first one was called the Liberator. It was named after the little rapidly produced, inexpensively guns dropped behind enemy lines into the French resistance during World War II. And it was very popular, and he was downloading the DefCAD files, and anybody could take these DefCAD files and 3D print a working firearm. And other additional firearms were then made available. And there was a big stink going on. Technically, they're not guns. It's just data, protected in theory by the First Amendment. And he was just giving them away through Defense Distributed. And he legally committed these prints to a public domain through a license from the U.S. Department of State. But now he's been ordered to shut down the DefCAD file repository by a federal judge in the Western District of Washington. So now Defense Distributed is selling their files online, because the judge's ruling in Washington was they can't give them away. Well, we're not giving them away anymore. We're selling them. So this won't last forever. They'll come back and take that down. But you know, in the age of the internet, they're out there already. Even if Cody Williams is not allowed to distribute them anymore, they're out there. They're on the dark web. People have got copies of these things all over. There's no taking it back. All right, getting on back to the international news. The Russian envoy to the United Nations is accusing the U.S. of basically choosing a neo-colonial course in Syria to basically get control of its resources. And yeah, that's what it's doing. In fact, if you remember that story we talked about in the first hour about a purported deal for the U.S. to leave Syria, included in that deal was a guarantee that American companies would get a big chunk of Syria's oil. And that's always been a major driver in all of these wars. It's not the major driver, but it's one of the major ones here. And this Russian envoy, Nabernzia, is saying it's true. This is neocolonialism, or I like to call it covert colonialism. In the original colonial period, countries would invade other countries and take them over and hoist their national flag. And that would say, this is now part of the British Empire, and this is now part of whatever. In this covert colonialism, the same exact thing is going on, except the flag of the United States does not get flown over the conquered territory because it upsets the locals. But the U.S. is going on out there, and they're trying to capture all these resources. primarily to shackle them to the U.S. dollar and keep this dollar hegemonic domination going. And that's what a big part of these wars are about, conquering all these nations and saying, you will sell and buy things using the U.S. dollar. So, alrighty, let's see. I'm just looking at a little data coming in on the computer. Because, all right, well, we'll just let that come up by itself. All right, so we talked about Cody Wilson, and we talked about apparently this Tom Fitton is making a big stink over this John McCain IRS scandal, because apparently IRS documents reveal that it was John McCain, or one of his staffers, who urged Lois Lerner and the Obama IRS to audit conservative groups so that they are financially ruined. Nice people here. All right, let's take another phone call. Richard in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine.
I'm just mainly calling in to figure out how to call in. I apologize for that. And I guess I was successful ultimately.
Yes.
But I'll call in again when I have something intelligent to say. But I'm an old retired neuropsychologist, and I've been listening to your show now for a while, and I really want to thank you for it, because I listen to it religiously every day that I can, and you're really very great.
Well, thank you.
There are things you say that I might disagree with, here and there, but basically you're right on target. And so I want to thank you for what you're doing. And I did make a donation of $100 about 4 months ago, and I'll try to do the same as I can go along. I'm a Social Security person. I'm an old man.
Okay, well, I appreciate all the help here, but please don't cut yourself short. And I never expect anybody to agree with me totally on everything. In fact, if anybody did agree with me completely on everything, I'd advise them to seek help. All I really want is to put the information out there and encourage people to become their own best analysts and figure things out for themselves. It's a lost skill.
I agree. I started out on this little journey back in 1968 and then 1970 when I was at Kent State, and I was out there when the students were shot by the National Guard. And I've been following everything ever since, really, all of the terrible things that have been done and things that we do, this nation that we live in. And so when I have something intelligent to say, I'll call back. But I'm so glad to be able to connect with you. Now I know how to do it. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for the phone call. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for the donation and the support here. All right. We're coming up here on our last final commercial break. And again, a reminder, Claire and I are taking the rest of the week off for a much, much needed rest. And we'll be back here Monday on Labor Day. RBN will be broadcasting live. And we don't know what's going to happen over the weekend. It's awkward timing. But with all this talk about chemical weapons being delivered to the militants in Idlib, with the white helmets already being there are just way too many people saying, we're expecting another false flag chemical attack. And you've got John Bolton and Macron are already out there saying, we're ready to go with the airplanes. We're going to just bomb the crud out of Syria if they dare use chemical weapons on their people. And again, why would Assad do something like that? Obviously, the United States has a motive to use chemical weapons on Syrian civilians to justify an attack. Assad has no reason. He's all but won the war. And he knows using chemical weapons would bring in the United States, justify another attack on his infrastructure. He's not going to do that. He's not a stupid man. And again, the final question, if he were going to use chemical weapons, why use them on civilians instead of on the enemy forces? This story does not make sense. It never really did. But you know something? If you go back and you look at most of the propaganda we have been fed over our lifetimes, and you actually dissect it and take it apart, you'll find that most of it makes absolutely no sense at all. Like crazed lone gunmen. We're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today here. So let's take a step back here and sort of summarize all of the trouble spots that are going on right now. You have, obviously, Syria, where the United States pretty much got pushed out. Russia and Iran and Syria and Hezbollah got rid of the proxy terrorist groups the U.S. was using. And now we're expecting there to be another one of these bogus false flag chemical weapons attacks on people, at which point the U.S. is going to launch another attack and go back into Syria. Whether it's going to be Idlib to create a corridor through which their pet terrorists can escape, or if they're going to try an actual attack on Assad himself, or maybe even both. That's one area where we have to keep an eye on. We had this story about how Saudi Arabia may shift their current war in Yemen, or at least part of it, over to Lebanon. That could really go on up. You have Iran, which is now saying they are in charge of security in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, and the Americans don't need to be there. We have not heard an American reaction to that yet, but I don't think it's going to be a pleasant one. I don't think the U.S. is going to say, oh boy, think of all the money we're going to save. Yeah, we're going home, thank you. Don't think that's going to happen at all. We have this continuing putting of pressure on Iran, which Iran is trying to play by the rules and go to the United Nations, and the U.S. response is basically, we're above the rules of the United Nations. This is all heading in a very, very, very dark direction, and like that one caller who called into the program, I'm very worried about the future children, not just of this country, but of the entire world. Because World War I was relatively confined to Europe. World War II was a lot of Europe and a lot of the Pacific. In an age of ICBMs and nuclear weapons, World War III is going to hit everywhere. And I know that Justin was mentioning they have deployed 2 B-2 stealth bombers to here in Hawaii, which is great, makes us a target. And you have to wonder about the sanity of people who are running this show. They seem to have this unshakable idea that they can win these wars, or if they lose them, it won't personally inconvenience them. And we've come to understand that people who achieve these positions of power and authority, they disconnect from the rest of humanity. They just don't care. When Roosevelt decided to goad the Japanese into attacking Pearl Harbor, he knew he was going to lose ships and a couple of thousand men. And his attitude was, yeah, that'll be worth it. That'll be worth it. So we need to come to understand that people who consider themselves our rulers are very, very different from us, and not in a good way. At least not for us. It's great for themselves, bad for us. Okay, there's the music. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots to share with you. And please share everything you're learning here and at the website with everyone that you know. Use email, use SneakerNet. Social media is becoming more and more filtered, and they're literally feeling that they can stand up to the President of the United States on this issue. So have a good Labor Day weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.